So we're continuing our series this month on the 4Ds: doubt, denial, destruction, and death. And we're up to destruction. So, some of us don't have this on our keyboard, the self-destruct button, but we have installed it in our own being as we have grown up. So destruction is something that is an effect of a consciousness of separation. When I feel like I'm apart from my source, when I feel like I don't fit in my surroundings, which is a projection of not feeling like I'm connected, then what I will tend to do is to use my inner subjective creativity to make the world or make my experience of the world match my worldview. So if I decide there's something wrong with me and there's something wrong with the world, I have to have things go wrong in order to stay sane. Now, consciously, I probably don't think this way. It's not something I'm thinking about. How can I hurt myself this week? But I'm probably thinking things like, oh God, I hope nothing really bad happens this week, because you know how I am. Right? And we go back to our experience of life, and more importantly, our interpretation of our experiences of life that really become that inner reality, the inner set of rules by which we play. It becomes the lens or the filter by which we see the world around us. And we are drawn to experiences and people with opinions that kind of match that worldview that we have developed. You know, has anyone ever known anyone that was kind of negative? Okay, a couple of you have, yeah. We should have a group for negative people here. We don't have a little group like the men's group and the writing group. We should have a negative group. See if anybody shows up. But you know, when you're around negative people, and what do I mean by that? I mean people that kind of have, it can look a lot of ways. It can look angry, you know, it can just look kind of depressed, kind of like, you know, Eeyore, you know, from Winnie the Pooh. How's everything, Eeyore? Well, about as well as can be expected. You know, that kind of thing. Where there's this sort of poor me mentality that's sort of, you know, has probably been with that person for a long time because they were raised in a little mini tribe that convinced them there was something wrong with them and that they were in a very difficult world. And many of us have had at least a portion of that kind of influence as we've grown up. You know, we were raised by people that misinformed us because they were misinformed. And, you know, my assumption would be if you found this teaching, you would probably decided that maybe it would be a good idea to wake up from that misinformation. Or maybe you're just here to meet people. I don't really know. But you know, my sense would be you kind of have realized over time that maybe something was missing, that it wasn't necessarily your destiny to live a life that wasn't optimal. And so you start looking around for where are some answers for me? Where are some people that I can connect with that seem to have it together? And I know many people that end up here, you know, none of us have ended up yet. We're still on our path, you know. You might have many more stops before you finish. But many people have been through a number of different experiences in terms of maybe different religions or different spiritual groups, or, you know, you've worked with there's secular groups that teach us what? How to be the optimal you. And they all have different opinions about how that should be and what it should look like. But I think in general we would agree it has something to do with feeling happy and fulfilled. And the difference is whether the group feels that, or the teaching or the philosophy says you should be happy and fulfilled by obeying a single authority, or you should be happy or fulfilled by finding your own inner authority and living from that. And we would be in the latter group. If you're looking for someone to tell you what to do, you've come to the wrong place. Okay, but you haven't really come to the wrong place. You've come to the right place. You're never in the wrong place, because you're always in a place where you can have an awareness. So every place you've been before here wasn't wrong for you. It was simply a place that led you to the next step. So destruction, when we have destruction in our lives, when we do things that are destructive to ourselves and others, even within, this is the real positive aspect of this, even within the greatest destructive act, there is a seed of opportunity to realize and make a different choice. Sometimes we have to feel the pain to such a degree that we say, wait a minute, this can't be right. There's a saying in metaphysics that the way most people change is reflected in this saying. When the pain of doing what you're doing gets greater than the pain that led you to do it, you'll stop. That's one way many of us change. We have a negative consequence of some kind, a negative experience, and we back away, sort of like putting your hand on a hot stove. And you back away and say, well, I better not do that again. And then you try to realign yourself based on what you shouldn't do. And the problem with that is it tends to be an indirect path to what you maybe ought to be doing. Because we tend to learn, when we get in that mindset, we only tend to learn through aversion. You know, there used to be a thing they used to do back in the 50s and 60s. They had a thing called anabuse. And if you were an alcoholic, they'd hook you up to a couple wires and a little battery, and then they'd set up the bar, you know. And every time you took a drink, they'd give you a little shock. Or they had a medication you'd take, and every time you drank, it would make you violently ill. So that then after a while, every time you thought about taking a drink, you didn't have to take the drink, you'd get violently ill. Or they'd use the shock system. They did that with smokers, too. They'd hook you up and say, here, take a puff. Every time you go, boo. Take a puff, ooh. Like that. And pretty soon they take the wires away and you take a puff and you go like that. Because it's conditioning, because we would get conditioned. So they would say, well, let's stop you from smoking by giving you a little shock. The problem is, when you learn that way, is you tend to not want to learn anything new after that. You know, that was kind of the way a lot of us felt about school, right? If school was like a really terrible experience, then you get out of school and now all of a sudden you live in a culture where in order to even stay even, you got to be a lifelong learner. And you've decided you hate school, you got a problem. You see? And many of us have conditioned ourselves, even after the people are gone, even after the people that treated you that way or conditioned you that way are gone, even after the wires are detached, see, we keep doing it to ourselves. Some of us talk to ourselves the way our angry third grade teacher talked to us. Our inner voice, the way that we communicate to ourselves is very scolding and very angry and very demeaning. If you had friends that talked to you the way you talk to yourself sometimes, would they still be your friends? You see. So that kind of a conditioning that often we fall prey to in various degrees can only lead to one thing. It leads to an outcome, in other words, of outpicturing in your life that matches it, which means that things kind of have to go wrong in order to support a worldview that comes from that kind of conditioning. If everything goes well, you start to get nervous because you need to scold yourself. If I have a need to scold myself that I've developed over decades of life and everything's going well, I got nothing to scold. So maybe what I can do is, if I can't stop things from going well, is at least I can feel guilty about it. You know? Bobby Sommer, who is a motivational speaker and writer, said, having a low opinion of yourself is not modesty. It is self-destruction. Holding your uniqueness in high regard is not egotism. It is a necessary precondition to happiness and success. So what we're talking about here is not, wouldn't it be nice to feel good about yourself? It's essential to feel good about yourself. It's essential for your well-being, and it's essential for every relationship you're in. Because everyone that you're in relationship with that has a low level of self-acceptance, that affects that relationship that you're in with that person. You know, when we call somebody high maintenance, right? Well, that's a reflection of a low sense of self-esteem. You know, I need to be cared for. And there's a lot of ways that can show up, depending on how the person understands energy. Some people that you have that poor me kind of thing I mentioned earlier, and the poor me will manipulate you by making you feel guilty that they don't feel good about themselves, that their life doesn't work. They'll somehow get you to take part of the blame. You know, that victim consciousness needs a victimizer. Or they could become very aloof. And the aloof personality is someone who never quite gives you the information you need. They always try to keep you off balance, where you have to kind of lean into them to pay attention, close attention to what they say, because they're not going to give you everything you need. And then there's the interrogator. The interrogator will ask you questions to like, you're not going out in that, are you? Is that what you really think? You really want that's what you really think about that idea? To make you feel somehow that you're less than. And what it is their own sense of inadequacy being projected out onto you. See? And then there's the intimidator. The intimidator is the person that probably is filled with self-loathing, but they've discovered that they can control people by yelling and screaming or being threatening. See? And usually when you stand up to the intimidator, they back right down. Because they're all about fear. So all of these different personality types, and there are others, are the way that we try to manipulate energy by trying to get energy from other people. And that's based on a complete misunderstanding of how energy works. Okay, you have within you, that is keeping you alive, an infinite supply of energy. You can't add to an infinite. You can't take away from an infinite. So the idea that I need to get energy from other people is a complete misunderstanding of our real nature. And yet it's not even something that I'm thinking I need to get energy from you. I'm just thinking if I can manipulate you a certain way, maybe you won't hurt me, or maybe I'll get what I want. And then we become manipulative of one another. See? And people that are manipulative tend to also be easily manipulated. That's why these crazy campaign ads work. Oh, I hate those ads, but they work. How do you explain that? Well, you know what? A lot of us think the world should be hateful. And there's a part of us that resonates to that message, even though consciously we may say, oh, that's so distasteful, give me more. See? Self-destructive behavior is where we keep going after more things that don't serve us, even though at many times we know at every level of our being that it's not good for us. We're always at a point of choice. And what happens is over time we develop these habits, and a habit is simply a subconscious pattern based on a belief that you can repeat without conscious interference. A habit is like when you tie your shoes. You know, you can tie your shoes and do something else because it's subconsciously a habit. But we also have other kinds of habits that are simply emotional. Those are generally called attitudes. So you're always at a choice point, though. But in order to make a choice, I have to bring it to the conscious level. I can't just operate from the habitual level. So what's an example of an attitude? And we all have attitudes, and we don't even necessarily know we've got them until they show up. Right? The classic example I usually give, I'll just do it again, is you ever walk into the wrong restroom? Right? Now, at some point, you become aware that you're in the wrong restroom. You know, I'm assuming you weren't aware when you went in, but you look around and the fixtures are different, and there are people of the opposite gender in here, and some of them may be screaming. So you go, what happens? Then you realize there's this big emotional flood, right? Oh my God, I'm in the wrong restroom. Now, where did that come from? You weren't born with it, right? It's not something that's hardwired into humanity to have separate restrooms and be anxious if you walk into the wrong one. That's not part of the deal. We learned it. It's learned behavior. And probably it's behavior you were specifically taught when you were little. Don't go in there after a certain age, right? Sometime when you're a little kid, you go in with your mom. And okay. And then when you start paying too much attention, it's time not to let you go in anymore. But we carry that attitude with us, so we will walk in. You know, it's sort of like there's a lot of those attitudes relating to socialization. You know, when I was at Fort Lauderdale with Dr. Arlene, they had parking places for she and I. And sometimes somebody would park in one of them. I'd show up and there'd be somebody in my space, which I didn't, I'll be honest with you, I really didn't care. I just parked somewhere else. And I go inside and then somebody would come in and say, someone's in Dr. Jim's space. And they were, oh my God, you know, it's like, it's okay. I can walk from the back of the parking lot. It wasn't a big deal, you know. But people would go, oh, a rule has been broken. Now, there's nothing wrong with having that reaction, but we have to understand that it wasn't something that just showed up. And we may have a lot of attitudes that are inappropriate to us optimally expressing ourselves. We may have a lot of attitudes that lead us to destructive behavior about ourselves and others. Ernest Holmes said, divine love and infinite wisdom could not create us as spontaneous individuals without letting us alone to discover ourselves. In other words, you know, we often ask, why didn't they make the universe so we're always happy? So that we always get what we desire? Why do we have to struggle? Well, the answer is, who the hell knows why they did that? But that's the way it is. It's pretty obvious by now. We've been around long enough as a species that we've kind of figured out there's some struggle involved to surviving on this planet. And to wonder why that is might be a nice mental exercise, but it's kind of a waste of time. It just is. Wouldn't it be better to say that's the way it is? How can I maximize my relationship with that reality? Because if I don't do that, if I'm bitter or angry because God didn't do a better job of creating the universe, then what's that going to do? That's going to say, I'm separate from that which created me, and it's going to lead me down a pathway of accepting and expecting my life not to work. And being very jealous of you or envious of you if your life does. See? And he goes on to say, in the process of self-discovery, we misuse the law of cause and effect. This is our sin or mistake. It is through these mistakes that we learn how to use the law of life rightly. In other words, life is about kind of trial and error, at least partly. When you're a little kid, you're growing up, you're trying, you know, little babies are very, you know, they're out there trying to learn what the world's like. And it's important to let them do that to at least to some extent, so within the bounds of safety, you know. I remember coming home one time when Caitlin was little and her mom was sitting there feeding her dinner, and she had like a little plate with mashed potatoes and peas on it and a glass of milk. And it was just a mess. There was stuff everywhere, all over the high chair, on the floor, and there were peas in the milk, and there was milk on the plate. And I come in and said, what's going on here? What are you doing? She goes, aren't you feeding her? She says, no, she's learning. What do you mean? Well, she's learning that if you put peas in the milk, they float. And she's learning when you put milk on the mashed potatoes, they get gooey. And she's learned how far she can throw gooey mashed potatoes. But see, the point is, within that, she was learning about her world. That's what we do when we're little. We want to experience everything. What does this do? How can I push this? Is it hard or soft? Which is why you have to child-proof the house. Because they're constantly doing experiments, you see. And that's how we are. We have that innate curiosity to know and to experience as much of life as we can, and sometimes that gets civilized out of us. Because we are brought up by caretakers that are more concerned with us behaving than learning. And there has to be a balance. You know, you can't have totally one way or the other. But we have to recognize that that's part of it. So our sin is that we misuse the law of cause and effect because we fail to understand our real relation to our real reality. Mainly because we're told from a very early age, there's something wrong with you. It's in the Bible. Right? Right in the first couple chapters. Getting kicked out of Eden and getting condemned by God. Now, why do you think a story like that was developed? because a bunch of people who happened to be, the Hebrews, living in the 12 tribes, life really sucked back then. It was really hard. Almost everybody died young. There wasn't enough to eat sometimes. Another tribe would come over the hill and take all your stuff. Or kill all your men and rape all your women. Most 90% of children died in their first year of life. So imagine sitting in a world like that saying, what the hell's going on? So the leaders, in order to kind of keep you in the tribe, would say, well, here's what happened. Here's why it's this way. And they sat around and figured out a story. We must have been condemned by our Creator or we wouldn't have to suffer so. So what might that look like? And then that story was created, the Adam and Eve story. And it was seen in those days as a metaphor, as a story that had a moral to it, to help us understand how we live. It only became literal later in life. The Bible was not taken literally until like the 1700s. But it was recognized there's a story in here. Somehow something must have gone wrong or life would be better. What we realize today, mainly through the invention of Western psychology, not through religion, is that we have the capacity within the process of our mind to make our life better. We already have the innate ability to do that, but if we haven't been taught how to do it, we don't do it. So what Ernest Holmes realized was, yes, it's time for us to step out of the old idea of religion as being condemned to original sin and to step into the full realization of who and what we have always been, which would be the New Testament, if you will. Because the Bible can be looked at as a study in the development of human consciousness. But it stopped 2,000 years ago. There's been a lot that's happened in the last 2,000 years. So what do? Sometimes we do things that we know are bad for us. Sometimes we do that. And sometimes we do the same thing with things that could be good for us. We have too much of a good thing. And I know some of you are thinking, well, that's French fries. They're not a good thing. Well, a little bit's okay. I mean, it's not a French fry is better than a cigarette. Okay, can we agree on that? Can I get a witness? If I have self-destructive tendencies in me because of the way I see the world and the way I've come to see myself, I can be self-destructive even with stuff that's potentially good. I can have too much of a good thing. You see? And I will do that if I need to do that psychologically to make my worldview seem like it's true. And it can be anything from overeating or smoking or overindulging in anything to finding ways to sabotage yourself at work or finding ways to create tension in relationships where it doesn't need to be. We will find ways to do that. The Buddha said what we think we become. So this isn't new. And stinking thinking, that's a term used in the recovery movement. Because you need to go into recovery because you got stinking thinking. Not because you're drinking or using drugs. That's an effect of the stinking thinking. So you could take the same Buddha statement and put it next to, be positive, think positive, have a more positive approach to it. Rather than avoiding the negative, let's approach the positive. Which direction do I need to go in to be positive? Well, I usually know within my being what is right for me and what isn't. Joseph Campbell says, and I love this quote of his, he says, you know when you're on the beam and you know when you're off the beam. The problem is we know we're off the beam and we keep staying off the beam because we don't think we deserve or can get on the beam. That's not true. That's not true. What we think we become, that's going on all the time. Ernest said, the road to self-discovery often calls for the clearing away of the underbrush of ignorance, fear, superstition, and a sense of isolation, which has made us feel that we were unworthy and lost. In the divine providence of good, salvation is unnecessary, but self-discovery is essential. One of our great teachers, Dr. Kennedy Schultz, used to say, if Jesus died for my sins on the cross, he wasted my time. He wasted his time. Only I can redeem myself by simply, I don't need to be saved, I need to wake up. Salvation implies you're getting a quality that you don't have. Awakening means you're awakening to a quality that is already within you, that you just haven't seen. Salvation requires an external power. Awakening recognizes that the power is within. It's a subtle difference in language, but it's a huge difference in effect. What if you already have everything you need to live an optimal life? Not just a good life, not just an okay life, not just a life that doesn't suck too bad, but an optimal life. That there is nothing outside of you that you could get and add to yourself that would in any way empower you to do that in a greater way than you already can do. What if you really knew that? Would that make your day any different? Well, I'm suggesting to you that it is so, and you can know it. Casanova, who was known to enjoy life in many ways, said, be the flame, not the moth. Be the flame, not the moth. The moth is the seeker. The moth wants the flame to be complete. The flame is the flame. Be the light. Because you are. You're not the moth. We often act like the moth, but we're not the moth. That's our big misunderstanding. In my mind, the three, and this is not necessarily the viewpoint of the management, but the three Abrahamic religions that form the basis of Western tradition, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have all missed one important idea. That we are one with that which created us, and that we have never lost our access to it. Which makes most of what they do unnecessary. Which is not to say, see, if I believed what they believe, I would see that everything they do is necessary. Because we are not capable on our own of making our own way. And if that's what you believe, you've got to create all these structures and mechanisms and ideas for people to adhere to. But if you're already complete, if you already have within you everything you need, you just haven't found your way to it, then all you need is some direction. You don't need an external change to occur in order to feel fulfilled. This is the hardest lesson to learn. How do I know that? Because it's the hardest lesson that I've had to learn, and I'm still learning it. And you'd think by now I get it. So I'm not expecting you to walk out of here fully realized today, but you have that capacity. It's one choice and one decision away to say, yes, I'm enough. Despite any evidence to the contrary in the past of your life, despite what any of the learned people in your life have told you reality is, that you've accepted as true, despite all the pre-verbal stuff you may have collected from your family of origin when you were a tiny little baby about the nature of reality that shows up now as emotion, you are enough. You are all there is. There isn't anything to add to you. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing to repair. There's only some fine-tuning to do from the realization of what's already so. That's all. There's no big problem. There's no little problem. There's only what you will say yes to. And I guarantee you right now, and many of you, there's a part of you that's trying to push back against that idea. To say, it can't be that easy. Not after all I've been through. So how do we accept that? Well, we have to go into the place of forgiveness. I'm sorry I screwed up for 61 years. but I'm ready to be healed now. See, if I won't let myself be fulfilled because it'll make the rest of my life look like a mistake, that's a bigger mistake. In law enforcement, we call that compounding a felony. But what, all those years of suffering, well, they obviously were necessary for you to get here or you wouldn't be here. But they don't define you. They don't define you. In the archetypes, there is an archetype called the destroyer. And every archetype, which is an essential universal characteristic, has a light side and a dark side. And the dark side of the destroyer destroys what is good, disrupts what is working, comes into the kingdom and destroys order and creates chaos. But the light side of the destroyer destroys what holds you back. Joseph Campbell talks about the destroyer as having a sword, and the sword slices away everything that holds you in place that is no longer necessary. All the stuff we don't want to let go of, all the crap in your garage. All the old strings of relationship that you're still clinging to, even though the person may not even be alive anymore, that are holding you back. It slices through them, and it does so mercilessly in order to set you free. So what I want you to do is cultivate a healthy destroyer. That when something is ready to let go in your life, you're able to let it go, and truly let it go, to release it. Anything that's holding me against that back wall has to go, or I can't go where I need to go. But, it was so great to be in that. My family is so important to me. I mean, yeah, they treated me like crap, and they all try to hold me back all the time, and I hate going home for Thanksgiving, but they're family. Well, you're back at choice. Now, you can choose to be with your family and be healthy, but you're going to need to be different when you're with them. You're going to need to hold your own. You're going to need to let them be whoever they are and recognize that has no effect on you if there's a toxic situation there. And in some families, let's face it, there is. Can I do that? If I can't, I need to sever the ties until I can. I don't serve my family by not maximizing my own expression of life. You know? My daughter recently asked me, my older daughter, what do you want from me in life? I said that you exceed me, that you find you get more out of life than I got out of mine, because you're more free. That's my greatest wish. Well, it just is. I mean, you know, Ernest Holmes, we love Ernest Holmes. We should all be going right past Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes was a mind of the mid-20th century. He couldn't even run a microwave oven. Your job is to take this teaching, this philosophy, and make it your own and transcend him to become your own greatest teacher. We don't hold him in any effigy or anything like that, or hold him up as a... He said, don't name anything after me. He did. He said, no room, no centers, no rooms in your centers. Don't do it. He didn't want his grave marked. He didn't want people making pilgrimages to his grave. Well, we marked it, but that's too bad. He recognizes, look, I'm just a man. He says, the consciousness that is this teaching, that those that carry it forward will greatly exceed mine. Jesus, the great teacher, said, these things I do, you shall do greater. Know you not that you are gods? You don't hear that one much. But it's in there. Look in Mark. You'll find it. These things I do, you shall do greater. Know you not that you are gods? So I would say to you, know you not that you are the God of your own being? That the only way God can do anything for you is to do it through you and by you. And there are no excuses for saying no to that. But you have that option. You have that option. So destruction, even when it happens, even if my life is littered behind me with a field of destruction of every relationship I've ever been in, or every situation I've ever been in, or I've run companies into the ground, or I've disappointed people, or I've hurt myself, in this moment, I stand in pure potential. I am not bound by that. Principle is never bound by precedent. I can make another choice right now to say, that's the old me, and thank God for it, because obviously that's what it took for me to wake up. But I don't have to live in it anymore. I can step beyond it. And if I don't step beyond it, I have no one is responsible for that decision but me. It's not because I wasn't parented well. It's not because I wasn't educated well. It's not because I've had a bunch of downers in my life that told me I couldn't be what I wanted to be. It's because I said yes to any of them. And if I keep saying yes to them, that's my choice. I need to say yes to what works. I need to say yes to a greater truth. I need to say yes to the realization that my life is about construction, not destruction. That I am a constructive element in humanity, and you know what? To be a constructive element in humanity is going to upset a lot of people. Because if people are bent on destruction and you're constructive, you're seen as a problem. You're seen as unrealistic. You're seen as whatever. Yeah, they crucified Jesus. And we all maybe get crucified from time to time for standing on our values. So that's part of the deal too. You know, the world isn't just going to lay down at your feet. Matter of fact, when you claim your power, all the ones that are fearful around you will start snarling at you. That's just what happens. And maybe that'll help them to wake up. So what this teaching is about is quite simple. When people say, what's that place you go to? What do they teach? Here's your elevator speech. I am one with that which created me, and I am the sole authority in my life. Thank you, and have a namaste.